Thanks, Markus. So, welcome from my side. First of all, I'd like to make a quick announcement. My name is Carsten Fellmann. I work for G-Data. We are supporting this course. And in addition to the invited talks here, we offer an evening event with some food and drinks and cozy atmosphere, where we hopefully have nice discussions. So, if you're interested in talking to Felix a little bit more in detail about topics he's presenting today, or if you just want to get in touch with people working in the antivirus community, all of you are welcome to join us. And yeah, if you're interested, don't hesitate to come to me after the talk and some details. Here are the details where we will meet.
Ja, aber da stehe ich
a few of us are here with the car, so transportation, we can talk about that. So, without any further delay, I'd like to welcome our known speakers today. So, enjoy.
Hallo. So, in English, right? German, English, Taiwanese? No. Okay. Hi, I'm FX. I have no idea what I do here. But I was asked to give another Hackpra lecture. The last time I did that was 2007. I expected pretty much the same thing, 10 people sitting around a table, and I tell them how to reverse engineer. Apparently it's more of you now. So security seems to be booming. That's good for us. So I'm, like most people, have a day job that pays their life, and then they're a hacker by night. You know, working for shitty AV companies or similar. For me, it's different. I'm a hacker by day, and by night I do international politics and policy. And so what you're going to see is pretty much like a cross-section of both, what I learned in one world and where developments go in a global scale, and what politicians don't understand. Also, if you're disappointed that there's no disassembly on the slides, I did bring some reverse engineering puzzles that I used in 2007 here. Hello. So if you want to do some reverse engineering afterwards, then at the event at G-Data, we're going to play a little bit with IDA, which is a disassembler, not a Go. Good. So what I'm talking about today is the question of security versus privacy being bullshit. Because this is what you often hear in discussions, is like, let's say you're in Brussels or in Washington, D.C., and then there's a bunch of lobbyists coming in and saying, well, we are for security. And then there's another bunch of lobbyists with longer hair saying, well, we're for privacy. And the politicians, as smart as everyone assumes them to be, don't get either. And so the point being, this is actually one and the same. And let me show you why. So starting point, where are we now? That should be fairly obvious. We have very interconnected lives today. Like, our identities are online, our businesses are online, our innovations are online, usually decentrally backed up in Asia. And our networks and devices are less and less under our control. The more fruit symbols you have on your devices, the less control. And you know, the companies and organizations get hacked pretty much on a daily basis by nation-state actors, and we don't even notice. That's the fun part, right? And what shall we do? So what usually happens is, you know, if shit goes wrong and wrong and wrong, then at some point legislation comes in, and legislation makes it worse. This is pretty much the same here. So the people that make computer security laws, what they think they do, they essentially think all the problems is cybercrime. You know, it's cybercrime and some other evil hackers. But in fact, this is how I would see it, right? There's different actors. So if you do computer security, stop thinking of the threat. There is not the threat. Doesn't exist. Depending on what assets you have, what could be interesting for someone else to fuck with, that's who you are facing. So we have, like, in the old school computer security lectures say, well, computer security is about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. It's about a lot more, but let's stick with those. And depending on what threat actor you're actually looking at, they are after some of these aspects or other pretty much different, right? So, I mean, Anonymous mostly attacks essentially the availability, also known as distributed denial of service or stupid people clicking on programs. LulzSec is a completely different matter. They actually hack, and they're actually really, there's some capable people in there. Recreational hackers, those people still exist. Like, sometimes you just hack something because, let's say you're interested in cloud computing. This damn Amazon cloud just takes up too much space in your living room. So why not use theirs? There's still people doing that. There's cybercrime. Cybercrime usually goes after the integrity, mostly after the integrity of your financial data. Military as well, but military is less and less concerned about availability in the offensive security part. Black hats, the definition of a black hat is a hacker that is also an asshole, but doesn't run a business, because that's also available. And then, the secret services, they essentially want everything. The interesting thing about that is, when you look at the threat actors, they have completely different qualities and completely different requirements on what they do. So what's the objective of a cybercrime operation? The objective of a cybercrime operation is maximize victims. You don't care who the victim is. You don't even really care what country is, and as long as there's money on a credit card. On the other hand, if you're an intelligence organization or military, there is someone walking up in your office and say, hack this guy. And if you ever did that, or if you ever tried to hack a specific machine on the internet, you will probably relate to my experience, which is, you look at the machine, you find the software, what they run, you look at the software, you find vulnerabilities, you write a 0-day, it doesn't work. Then, you improve the 0-day, it doesn't work. Then you go like, damn, does it only not work on this machine? Then after a while, you owned about a couple of thousand machines on the internet, you're still not in this one. So this is the regular pattern, right? This is completely different than what cybercrime does. They only want a percentage, a maximum percentage, and they want to survive over time. While military operation has an operation time, and hacktivism is a very short impact thing. There's other things that are completely different here. So what I want you to take away here is that depending on who you deal with, this is a completely different pattern, both from the attack pattern as well as from what they're after. So there's not one size fits all, right? The problem is you often need to explain that to politicians, because they think cybercrime is all the online issues that we have. Meaning that they still think that they can buy more of the big yellow boxes from the semantic lobbyist guy, and then they're good. And this does work. So I tend to say that for automatic created attacks, like malware, automatic created defenses will definitely work. For manual created attacks by expert teams, your automated defenses will not work. This is the shining red thing down there. For a targeted operation performed by a good team of, let's say, 10 good hackers with the respective resources, we have absolutely nothing in terms of defenses to put against them except for good people. And good people are pretty rare, actually, especially in the defense side. So why is that the case? Why don't we have automated defenses? This is something I did. As you can see, it's a bit dated material. So in 2005, I essentially took the entire CVE database and wrote a couple of Perl scripts. Yes, old people like me write Perl, not Python. So wrote a couple of Perl scripts and classified all the CVEs that we have in terms of what is actually attacked. Like, and you see to the left, the blue part, that's the operating system. So back in the day when I thought I'm young, we would look for ODay in operating systems. Because, you know, if you have an ODay in operating system, you don't care what runs on it, you just own it. This was also supported by the fact that most people ran Solaris, which has a lot of ODays. But then, you know, 2000 and on, the operating system vendors either realized that they need to do something, aka Microsoft, or essentially went out of business, aka Sun. So the problem went away, one way or the other. So then, of course, the next thing people go after, it's the green part, it's the server software. Web server, mail server, chat server, porn streaming, what have you. So this is the next best thing, right? You can't own the operating system. You look for the servers that run on the operating system. You own a server. It usually runs as root, or it doesn't. But you know, this is how you get it. Then servers got rarer. Actually, there was another aspect. Server software is also operating system provided server software, like sharing your drives on Windows. And the single highest impact defense that was ever rolled out on the internet was the release of XP Service Pack 2 with the, by default, enabled firewall. Because mom and dad suddenly didn't provide any services anymore. Which leads me to the yellow part. And the yellow part is non-server software, also known as browsers. You know, the things that you click on in the morning to see your porn. What is also, as a side note, what is interesting is encryption modules. Encryption modules is this very tiny blimp up there in 2000, the darker blue one. So if you still think security is crypto, forget it. Crypto is the only thing that we pretty much have nailed down. So what do we see here? We don't have any defenses capable of repelling state-sponsored adversaries, right? So we don't have anything. And this is probably not going to change in the future because, yeah, our software quality is going to stay the same it is right now, which is basically utter shit. Now, is this cyber war? Short excursus in international law. No, it is not cyber war. The term cyber war is absolute bullshit. If you hear cyber war, start laughing about the guy because there's two reasons. First, I think nobody can say cyber without looking stupid, except for one person in the world. That's William Gibson. He invented the term. The other thing is cyber war will never happen for international legal reasons. No state right now and in the foreseeable future wants to promote an online conflict into the state of armed conflict. Because the state of armed conflict, aka war, is very well defined in international law and has a lot of rules. Some of you might have heard of the Geneva Convention, right? This only applies if you are in war. If you're not in war, you can do whatever you want. Computer-based sabotage, Stuxnet being the prime example. Oh, by the way, if you ever hear someone talking about Stuxnet, first question you should ask, did you read the code? because like there's so many people talking about this and never read the code, so don't fall for bullshit. So Stuxnet actually by a document developed from the NATO people in Talon, the so-called Talon manual, constitutes the use of force. Use of force meaning you're not really at war, but you're already shooting at each other, right? There's also a couple of rules in international law that cover that. Also, the NATO agreed that the United States and Israel, who by now are well known to have developed and deployed Stuxnet, actually kind of like trampled around on the United Nations Charter, which, in the long run in international politics is not a smart thing to do. So it is very unlikely that we will see a lot more of that in the future. However, espionage internationally is completely fine. There is nothing internationally that does not allow espionage. Espionage is only illegal domestically in the country. So every country has laws that say, if you come into my country or you've been born in my country and you steal secret stuff and you sell it to other people, you're a spy and we can do evil things to you. How evil those things are depend on the country. They range from a slap on the wrist to, the Chinese solution. And they actually sent you the bill for the bullet. But espionage is fine. Now, online is pretty nice because now the only risk you have in espionage, your spy actually getting caught in the country, is ruled out. So we will not see cyber war, but we will see a lot of conflict, and we will see a tremendous amount of intelligence work. One last word about the state of war. There's another reason nobody in the NATO wants cyber war to happen, because then if Turkey would get hacked, they could call what is called the Chapter 5 of the NATO Convention, which is help from everyone else, and nobody wants to go to war because Turkey was too stupid to patch the windows. So, having nailed down that everything moves towards espionage, when you do espionage online, when you break into, let's say, a weapons manufacturer in the United States, what you want is their data. Essentially, what you do is you read their email, right? So, reading your email, reading someone else's email, an individual target's email, is what we call surveillance. So, you see how this moves slowly towards the privacy issue, right? So surveillance, the focused, systematic, and routine attention to personal details of purpose of influence, management, protection, or direction. And see, I'm speaking in front of an academia crowd, and I even have correct quotations where the paper can be found. So I hope you appreciate that. So nation-state hacking actually does fulfill the characteristics of surveillance. Nation-state hacking is a superset of surveillance. However, this is espionage in scale. So, the famous APT, Advanced Persistent Threat, or to say it with the words of the brilliant Professor Sergei Bratus, the advanced part in Advanced Persistent Threat is it worked. That's the advanced part. And the persistent part is nobody noticed and they came back. So we have seen a couple of very successful APT operations in the past in nation-state level. And there's a case of a foreign ministry, a complete foreign ministry, being owned by what is commonly assumed to be the Russians for over 4 years. The technology they employed was tremendously impressive. So to give you an example, there's a kernel rootkit Okay, that's not a big deal. However, the kernel rootkit contains two 100% correct disassemblers, one for 64-bit and one for 32-bit. Now, the question is, why would the kernel rootkit need a disassembler? Well, it actually disassembles the kernel itself after patching. So when you apply a Microsoft update, it will disassemble lots of code and find out if the data structures changed and if the offsets changed of the things it used to patch. This just being one part. So there is people that actually know how to do that correctly, right? There's, the APT1 report from Mandiant lists a single operation that went for 10 months and had 6.5 terabyte data exfiltrated. I know of cases in Germany where the company would lose, like it was a large company hacked, they would have between 50 and 500 gigabytes per day data exit. And consider the amount of porn that the people serve in this company. Apparently, this never even registers as a spike in the network traffic. So, for extending this game even larger, there is since almost a decade or more, there's this strategy of what John Mallory and I call the second colonization. So what you do is, instead of hacking a country, you incentivize the country to buy your shit. That is a lot better. That is even a lot better than hacking. So you just make your shit cheaper, right? So your technology does the same as everyone else's technology, but yours costs the half. This is relatively nice because let's say you're not at war, and let's say they're your partners. Well, you spy on everyone anyway, right? So even in NATO, everyone spies on everyone else. But let's say they're your partners, then you make money. If they become your enemies, you turn off their internet, or their mobile network, or whatever else you supplied the equipment for. The strategy was, as far as I know, actually invented by the Israelis. If you are interested in why, talk to me afterwards about voice boxes. So let's sum this up. The lack of computer security that we're facing today enables surveillance. The thing is, it enables surveillance for everyone, not only the people that you want to have the capability, if any. Now, relatively recent research comes to the conclusion that a often debated question whether surveillance is harm or not is actually answered, and yes, surveillance is harm. I myself am from East Germany, so I did grow up in a society where surveillance was constant. And I can tell you that the lack of intellectual privacy, the ability to think any thought you want and be able to discuss it with peers without being prosecuted for thinking, it's not nice if you can't do that. So this is what is called intellectual privacy, the opposite of thought control. And if you have constant surveillance, then intellectual privacy is not a given. The freedom just disappears. Also, surveillance enables blackmail. If you ever read someone else's email, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is relatively easy to, pursue someone to do something that that person really didn't want to do if you know about something that that person really didn't want anyone else to know. And porn being the lowest in this list, right? Goes up. I mean, everyone serves porn. That's hardly blackmail material anymore. The surveillance also gives power to pursue. This is exactly what the nation-state actors try to do when they, let's say, break into a military-industrial complex system. They actually don't want to blackmail people because it's a First of all, yeah, you get blackmailed from China. First, you need to find someone who can read Mandarin, and then, that's not useful. Now, what they actually want is, change the development slightly in one way or another. But also, surveillance causes sorting and discrimination. To give you an example, the city of Santa Cruz in the United States, they have pretty much a minority report style system in place for a year now, which, shockingly enough, was developed in academia and then sold to the police. So what that does is it takes all the crime information they have constantly in, does some fancy big data, machine learning, blah, blah, peng, poof, and then essentially has a map. And they all have tablets, like the police people have tablet computers. And on the map, there's red areas. And this is where they should look for, things to happen. And they proudly report that, a break and enter reduced by 9%, car theft reduced by 13%, arrests raised by 59%. However, most of them incorrectly. So what happens is, you're a person between 18 and 21 walking, let's say 6 p.m. Through a certain parking garage, and you get arrested because you were about to steal a car. Most of them actually were looking for their damn car that they parked last night before getting drunk and stoned. But no, you get arrested, but it's sold as success. And this is because of surveillance. Surveillance that we don't actually see. Also, this type of surveillance produces a lot of commercial opportunities. These commercial opportunities cause companies that, some of you might know, a, minor money increase of 28 billion US dollars per year, namely Google, which is 96% of their entire income. That is a relatively good reason for surveillance. Money usually provides a good incentive for most people to do very evil things. Facebook was too busy writing, plugins for Farmville, so they're late in the game, and selling profiles, which essentially is a boiled-down big data version of surveillance. Reporting only makes them 4 billion a year. However, since they include more information on sexual preference and other things, they had an increase in that sales by 40% in Q1 of this year. So big data allows the tremendous amount collected, and it's all in one basket. Now, if you think back to the state actor, this essentially paints a very big target sign on your big data operation. Because you don't have to break into this company or that company. If you want to read anyone's email, break into Google. Google will have a copy one way or another, right? So that's essentially how you do it. And we've seen how that works with Operation Aurora. Operation Aurora, for those of you not familiar with that, in 2009, Google got hacked. It's not like they don't get hacked in other years, but in this case, they noticed. So what happened was a state actor that had a very specific interest in Tibetan emails. So, it could be any state actor, but not many people read Tibetan. Broke into Google and wanted to read specific emails, 12 email boxes. 2 of them, evil bastard, that is not by the terms of use, like he used 2 mailboxes, that's not good for his profile. AYY, he's now in Germany. Called dissidents in some countries. And if you know how Google works internally, it's essentially a very large MapReduce query system So every intern at Google can read your Gmail. Apparently, or supposedly, they get fired if they do that, but who knows? So it's not really hard once you're inside Google's corporate network to read anyone's email. However, the NSA needed a special surveillance interface. And that was provided by Google. But then it doesn't make them any money, right? And that's the same for all data retention. The provider has a cost center. There's additional software and stuff that they need to maintain. But it doesn't make them any money. So what do? They put it there and they forget about it. Well, Google is not much different. So the state actor, instead of learning how to use MapReduce, used the NSA interface because it was already there. So it's this, that, and that guy. Give me the email. Thank you. So this is the big problem with the big data. Is like if you put all your eggs in one basket, you're asking for someone to take them out there. Make sense? Good. Now, government. Some people, depending on how far right of the political spectrum you live, the more you support governmental surveillance, right? Or you're so far right that you can turn out on the left side again, then you support it as well. So there's legitimate reasons for government to intercept communication, right? If you have a major crime, and that major crime has a component of someone using electronic communications, it will actually be very useful to be able to listen to his calls and read his email. Let's say, he grabbed your kid and tries to blackmail you. That's a very good reason to have surveillance. However, what we do currently is something else. What we do is complete coverage surveillance. So a few people whose business model expired 10 years ago make our governments install deep packet inspection in order to find those evil money laundering bastards that share MP3s. Now, this actually significantly increases the vulnerability surface of our national internet infrastructure and European internet infrastructure. And why is that? If you ever try to hack a piece of software that takes your input and reads 4 bytes at a specific position, then you know what I mean, because this is what a router usually does, right? You get a packet in, you read 4 bytes called the destination IP address. And then you make a routing decision and you send it out again. This works pretty nicely. And even Cisco, with all their might and stupidity, has not figured out how to make a buffer overflow out of 4 byte. So even they managed to do that correctly. Now you do deep packet inspection. So you take a Perl regular expression engine on the entire packet that you try to reassemble somehow. How is that for vulnerability exposure? There is a lot more code you're running through. There's a lot more shit you can fuck up. Cisco is happy. Everyone else gets ODA. Not a good idea. Lawful interception goes into the same direction. So some of you might know that I do router exploitation for a decade. If you have code execution on a router, like kernel level, and you try to turn it into a sniffer because you want to see, you want to capture the porn logins from your colleagues, the router dies. Because the router is optimized to hold to this packet as little as possible. Like, take the packet, IP address, look up, fire. Now, if you say, well, copy it into the main memory for me, please. No, there is not enough performance for that. The whole thing goes down the pan. Now comes around law enforcement says we need lawful interception. As I said, there's perfectly valid reasons to have that. Now this functionality is built in. So every idiot who hacks your router can actually use that functionality and say, give me a copy of that data stream, please. Funny side story. the few cases where I heard from ISPs of pointed copy of a data stream from someone where they couldn't say, well, give me only web traffic or give me only email, ended up with the police calling them back 10 minutes later saying the data stream would be too much for their Pentium 1 machine that was supposed to collect it. So one very good defense against full-blown surveillance by normal law enforcement: get a fat pipe and a fat machine and download as much as you can. Also, as I already pointed out, the problem with Google, the same holds true for data retention. If you have data retention, you're asking a provider to set up and maintain a very large, very boring database that only costs them money and doesn't make them any money. Which means it's going to look like your first semester implementation of a database. And it's going to be not maintained at all. It's all pure cost center, and the only incentive is for the attacker to hack it. The third part of surveillance that most people happily subscribe to is walled garden ecosystems. Again, the more symbols of fruit you have on your mobile devices, the more you know about that. When you have a walled garden ecosystem, you have a bunch of rules, right? For example, Apple doesn't like porn, which I don't understand. I mean, but the whole internet was built for it. Why? Yeah, anyway. So if you want to enforce those rules, you have to surveil all the content that comes in all the software. So you have to have surveillance capabilities, right? So like your typical app collection and install service, on some devices it's called App Store, is essentially as good as airport security. So it's a single point of failure, and good systems actually tend to have multiple points to see failure. And we've seen how that works in reality in the United Arab Emirates. Because BlackBerry, to a significantly less extent, has also a walled garden ecosystem. And so what happened there was, so BlackBerry is actually relatively secure. Ignore BlackBerry 10. Like the new OS is, forget them. But like everything before was pretty decent, actually. And the crypto actually worked. It was actually end-to-end. So telcos and governments were not really happy about that because they couldn't read your email. Sorry. Now, the way BlackBerry protected its handhelds was to run Java software, of all things, on the device. It had to have a certificate from one of the two certificate roots. One of them, obviously, RIM, the maker of BlackBerry, and the other one being the local telco. Now, in the Emirates, the local telco is, as in most Arabic countries that have their special forms of state, this is all like the cousin of the brother of the G thingy. So, it's all one family. So they do have that certificate. And they're like, wow, okay, so we can roll out software here. So they rolled out a piece of software that they called, any beer with them? No. So they rolled out a piece of software that they called a performance update. And signed it with the local telco certificate and rolled it out to 1,450 BlackBerries. Mind you, this is far more than they have citizens. So that also worked for all the expats and everyone else who happened to be in the Emirates at that point in time. Now, the only reason this really blew up in their face, and this is a pattern that is repeating worldwide, is the only thing that prevents our states, even our democratic states, from going full surveillance on us is their level of incompetence. Which held true in this case as well, because you're rolling out a backdoor to 1,450 to do 145,000 BlackBerries, and you have one command and control server, one on a very small internet connection. So essentially what happened was the server immediately died under the traffic, and the client tried to reconnect to the server, and by this depleted the batteries in no time. So people noticed that their BlackBerries had like a battery lifetime of 10 minutes. So pro tip, if you roll out a big backdooring operation, make sure that your command and control server can take the traffic. So, what did we learn? We're in an educational environment here. I have to ask that question. Any capability will be used by the attacker. So be careful what you wish for in terms of functionality. If you haven't built it in, it cannot be turned against you. If you build it in, it will be turned against you. Ever had an argument with your wife? Know what I mean. So this means essentially that what we need is we need to evolve our idea of the requirements for regulation. So surveillance does transcend the private-public divide. So it's not clearly defined that, okay, so if it's public, then we can surveil. If it's private, then not. I think that secret surveillance shall not be accepted. If you are surveilled, then please make that obvious. And don't hide it in your terms of service somewhere in chapter 57,405. Total and constant surveillance is an enormous risk for entire societies. And if you have control, then there should also be liability. So if you run data retention and someone breaks into data retention, you should go to jail. And the measures that we use should actually hold up to efficiency and proportionality as every other fucking law in the world as well. Even in military conflicts, the definition of what can you do to your opponent is based on proportionality. Now, rolling out DPI on the entire European internet backbone in order to find someone who copies an MP3 from one machine to another is not proportional. It is a risk. And here's where academia comes in, because right now, we suck badly at metrics and measurements. We have absolutely no way to measure efficiency and proportionality of those measures. So, if you have nothing else to do in your research, get busy. Data protection is security. So, the less stuff you have on your device, the less sexy it is to break into your device, right? This means data protection laws need enforcement liability where you have all your data. So, in Germany, for example, we have really good data protection laws. Problem being, the sum of all fines that are posted per year, like all fines that are posted to different companies per year, is about 30,000 euro. Now, if you take that and compare that to the money that Google makes on breaking your data protection laws, this, 30,000 euro, that's what they pay for sponsorship in a hacker strip club. That's nothing. So as long as that is the case, those laws don't help us at all. I, for myself, any lawyers in the room? Probably not, right? And a thing I discuss with lawyers a lot is the question of, in this day and age, should we not consider personal information and personal identifiable information as my personal property? Because that would mean that Google and Facebook steal from me, and I can sue them by existing laws. That would be interesting. also, I think capabilities actually need a lot more control. So if you have a functionality for law enforcement, it should be well defined and heavily audited. One idea that John Malderoy and I were floating around is instead of every vendor having fucking vendor backdoors in their software all over the place and claiming they need that for customer maintenance, how about defining one well-known standard for a vendor backdoor? Because then you can audit the code, and you're good, and you know exactly when the vendor uses it. Pretty much like SSH. Used to be a vendor backdoor for Theodorat, or whatever. A functionality that is not legally mandated must not be available. So one idea is to actually fine companies for having backdoors. A downside is Siemens would probably lose 1 or 2 business units in the first month after this law getting into effect, because they often have more backdoors than functionality in their devices. However, in the long run, it could lead to an interesting education in the legal system, where lawyers and state attorneys actually finally have to face the question of what is a backdoor. How do I see a backdoor? When can I find someone? So this is what we consider the vendor penalty for backdoor. It could be fun. So, and because I'm in academia and I get to tell you shit, here is the direction that Germany hopefully signs off, but pretty much decides to go in international cybersecurity strategies, basically. Because Americans, so to sum up the world of cyber strategy, there's the Western view, the Eastern view, and the European view. The Western view is America and its allies, or, well, the United States mostly, that essentially think, well, if you hackers, we bomb you. Attribution, oh well, then we bomb you and everyone else. Good. Well, not so my deal. The Russian and the Chinese, who even proposed that to the United Nations already. You would expect of all countries in the world that Russia and China are the perfect partners that go to the United Nations and say, here's a code of conduct for how to conduct on the internet. They actually did that. A very funny story, but a bit too long for now. So their idea of cybersecurity on a global scale is we just surveil everyone. If you do something, because if we would surveil everyone, there's no attribution problem. And we can, either kill them or, find them otherwise, or we can tell the Americans and then they bomb them. And so what Germany is heading for, and hopefully also all of Europe, is, you know what, instead of spending all that precious money on cyber weapons, how about fixing our fucking computers? So let's try it to be the defensive part in the world. And here's a couple of research ideas that you can take away or, ignore me. But here are a couple of things that I find interesting that will shape the future. Rule number 1, instead of bolt more shit on broken shit and be surprised that the shit is even shittier now, stop doing that. Replace a couple of things that are simply no longer suited for the 21st century. So von Neumann architectures were a really, really good idea when memory cells were really, really expensive and made click, right? Because you didn't have much of them. The problem here is that by now storage is pretty much very, very cheap, almost to the cost of 0. So if you replace a von Neumann architecture with a Harvard architecture and your data cannot become code and your code cannot become data, exploit writing sucks monkey balls. Sweaty, hairy monkey balls. So do it, right? Embedded systems are a really, really good place to do that. Hypervisors are a really good place to do that. And, well, there's other areas, but this would be one. Interestingly enough, when we have very successful ideas in defense research, right? They come up with something cool, they test it, it actually works. So it wasn't from academia. And you know, they roll it out, and then someone says, like, but this paper from 50 years ago didn't say that the same thing. This is usually what happens. So if you think, for example, that virtualization and cloud computing are the new things, let me remind you that the first computers that got shipped were virtualizing. They had virtualization already. We got rid of it in the terms with the personal computer. But the first ones actually had hypervisors, right? If you're interested, I think I have it with me. The first known exploit was written by someone in the Air Force. And back in the day, those were still men. And men wrote their exploits in Fortran. And this was actually a hypervisor exploit written in Fortran. And it fitted on 4 A4 pages printed out. I can show that to you if you want. So look at older shit. Especially look at older shit that was developed in a time where the hardware power was not capable of delivering what they thought about. But it actually turned out to be a good thing. So as an exercise for the audience, right? Take the Red Book from the DoD Rainbow series. Division A, verified protection system. Take a JavaScript interpreter and build one. Show me that you can do that. Maybe you can. If you work on compilers or anything that is compile time generated, please, please, please read about control flow integrity. Essentially, very, very short summary of CFI. And I know there has been some research here to apply that for mobile phones. You take a control flow graph. Every time you branch somewhere, you verify that the branch destination was known upfront at compile time. Relatively easy to do. Makes exploit writing hairy fucking monkey balls bad. So do it. Verification is nice. I'm a bit sad about the fact that most of the formally verified systems never left the ivory tower. But systems of the next generation will actually distribute a lot of computing across many different CPUs and many different PICs and small specialized devices, for which it is a lot easier to formally prove correctness if you have one chip that you can finally rely on to not fuck you over every time the vendor had a bad day. This would be really, really nice and will do a lot for the entire system security. Again, virtualization and hypervisors are a really good place to look for that. They're also a really good place to actually have something formally verified because usually the formally verified systems have the user experience appeal of Pong. I mean, the original Atari Pong. However, Pong as in you're trying to use it as a word processor. So that's always been the problem. Now, when you apply that to a hypervisor, the user still gets to run his broken OS X, but at least the hypervisor is secure, right? So, my favorite, Langsec. If you haven't checked out Langsec at langsec.org, hard to memorize, definitely do that. This is one of those cases where I say, look, you know, in the past there was the guys with the good ideas. This being Noam Chomsky and the Chomsky hierarchy. Well, you know, this, if you can use communication or protocols, if you use protocols and you consider them a formal language, make them as simple as you can. My favorite example is if your computer wants to remotely turn on and off a light. How about not using fucking XML for that? Because the amount of information you need to transport is 1 bit, right? You don't even need error correction because you will see if it stays dark. Send another packet. Scarily enough, I mentioned that in a keynote at SAP in front of 300 people that at least had a diploma in informatics. About 10 got it. Also, the same thing can be used for normalization. That is something I did for Flash. I could actually show, or I could actually make Flash movies secure although they try to exploit you. So you could watch the porn but not get owned in a practical application of science, right? Which afterwards, Sergey Bratos explained the whole Chomsky hierarchy to me because I actually didn't know what I was doing, but it was correct. The next problem field that is really interesting is disconnectedness. You know, especially we geeks tend to, if we have two things, then we come up with a wire to connect them. Everyone else does that the same way. And once you gave someone you know, the capability of controlling something with his iPhone, he will never let go of this capability anymore. There's a funny situation in, I think it's Thailand, where the investment possibilities are not the ways they are here. So dentists in Thailand make a lot of money. And, well, they have very little to invest to. But one thing that is rare is power, electrical power. So dentists invest in power stations and you know, power generations and stuff like that. Now, they want to see how their investment does, right? So guess how many power systems in Thailand can be remotely monitored and controlled by iPhone apps? That does not really good for the national security of the country. Now, research into the question of how to replace that with, you know, this functionality, they will not let go of this functionality. However, if you, for example, apply LangSec and develop new protocols that are regular grammars and write a secure parser in state machine for both sides and prove the correctness and equal understanding of the grammar on both sides. Implement that, then they have a secure power station and they can watch it from their iPhone and they don't get hacked. Consider that. Another one that that concerns me a lot, and this goes back into the direction of privacy, is the question, you know, in classic computer security books, probably also in your course material here, it says, well, authorization and accountability only happen after authentication. Authentication being you identify yourself and then you prove this identity, right? Username, password being the prime example. If you know any girls, kisses can also be a really good authentication. So the problem being authentication carries the threat of surveillance because you already identified the person, which is the knee-jerk reaction of most of the German interior politicians in terms of how do we get the internet secure? Oh, you know, we have an EPA, right? The E-Personalausweis identity card. Why not just require a swipe of the identity card in order to get an IP address? Because then we know who it was, right? That is literally discussed, and it was, you know, it closely did not make it into legislation proposals. So the question is, can it be shown that we can have all the functionalities that we usually rely authentication on, like accountability, or partial authentication or identification. So we only need to identify that person when that person fucked something up, for example. Or how can that be solved? Because that solves a lot of other problems in big data. Let them profile the shit out of you if they don't know who you are. Interestingly enough, on a transnational scale, when you go to those conferences, the only people that make sense and speak clear words are lawyers. Unbelievable, right? Like when you talk to a lawyer, you usually get 5 opinions, and you don't understand one. But in this case, now they actually make sense. So there is a project called ABC for Trust that is EU supported that already works on the legal side of that, and they want to put this into the data protection laws in the European Union. So if you research that, you also have a hint now where to get funding. And funding is good, right? Next topic, Turing tests. CAPTCHA suck. Seriously? Today, CAPTCHAs online, I fail more Turing tests than I win. So either I am a computer, which would mean whoever built me fucked it up badly, or CAPTCHAs suck. I mean, you know, this is all just like colory pixels to me. But the ability to make automated distinctions between human and computer operation without annoying the fuck out of the human, that's the important part. This will become more and more important in the future. Because we're still running in a security concept from the defense side of you, where your software and you are from the security system, they're the same, right? We even say when we develop software, we even say this runs under the user of, right? But it's a damn big difference if the bot saying I'm running under FX on this machine does something or I do something, right? I want to be able to click everywhere I want, and you know, if I want to pay for this porn, I want to pay for this porn. But I don't want this bot to pay for this porn because he's not going to show me. So on mobile phones, for example, this is a really, really good defense. There's a couple of guys that currently work on something like that in order to prevent remote control and silent calls. Like if you didn't actually dial the number, then the phone is not supposed to call the number, period. But do you want to fill out a CAPTCHA every time you want to call someone? Nah. So go ahead, find something better. Vulnerability finding is still an interesting field to look at. Automated identification of vulnerability code is good. Also, with all the bug bounty programs around the world, you know, it can totally finance your studies forever, probably. Like, I know a bunch of students that actually make more money than I do by finding vulnerabilities in code and collecting bug bounties to finance their studies. Also, vulnerability finding has a geopolitical layer that is extremely entertaining. So you can't prevent the militaries and the intelligence services around the world from obtaining what they call cyber weapons and we call exploits, right? Like, we can't do anything about it. There's some stupid people that say, well, if we are not selling them exploits, then they don't have exploits. Well, I mentioned that the first exploit was developed by the Air Force. What do you think they do now, right? So we can't actually prevent them from doing that bullshit. However, if you find the vulnerability as well, and you publish, it's no longer ODE. So what you're effectively doing is you go like, you know, Mr. Military, give me that weapon. Thank you. So one less in their arsenal. This makes the whole cyber conflict part for military leaders extremely annoying right now. You know, if you have an airfield full of, like, let's say 20 F-16, and there's a conflict situation, and your general comes in and says, like, what do we have to bomb them? You say 20 F-16. When he runs into the cyber operations, what do we have to hack them? Let's see which one is still valid. So, you know, that's, and the more we do full disclosure, and the more we automate vulnerability finding so it's not actual work and we can go out drink, and some computer program automatically takes the weapons from the cyber warriors, the better. Defense is only 1/3 of the game. This is completely ignored mostly right now. So everyone focuses on defense. You know, let's prevent this virus from running. Let's prevent this hacker from going in. Detection is more important, or at least 1/3 important as well. So the biggest problem right now is people, especially large organizations, don't notice when they get hacked, which is why these operations usually run for years. You know, but, who breaks into, let's say, who breaks into a warehouse and steals shit for 2 years, like constantly? Someone has to notice, but this is not the state right now. So what I'm not talking about is intrusion detection or other bullshit. We need to find ways to detect successful attacks. Detecting the attempt of attack has utterly failed. This is called IPS and IDS. No, that's not what we're talking about. But the holy grail, if you want really hard and tough tasks, is recovery. A very simple example. I break into your PC or, okay, hipster crowd Macintosh, and hack the shit out of it and backdoor it and blah, blah, blah. And you ask your friend, what should I do? What's going to be the answer? Anyone? Reinstall. Nuke the machine, reinstall. Now, if I break in your SAP, and you're an international corporation, reinstalling is no longer such an appealing option, which is another reason why we still have the Chinese everywhere in there. So recovery and recovery strategies that actually work, also in software and software compatibilization, are a very, very big thing in the future. If you make the first breakthrough, then you can immediately spin off a company and get rich. So I'm stopping to boring you. The only thing I leave is one final request. Don't do stupid shit, because that is very often done, unfortunately. So whatever you do, please occasionally, just in a matter of every couple of months, review whether your approach relies on proving Alan Turing and the halting problem wrong, right? So if your approach assumes that you can solve the halting problem, then maybe consider something else. Also please consider your research in the context of real world. So the point cow in vacuum usually can be made to produce 4,000% more milk, but then in reality the cows don't agree. And if something only, like if you have a security system that only takes an 80% performance hit on a regular desktop computer, then maybe consider another approach. And because I see that too often, especially in EU and NATO financed research, just because you got money for it still doesn't mean it is a good idea. Because those people might actually not have read your proposal, but it turned out to be the only one that was correctly written. And this is why you got the money? And in my eyes, it's a lot better to solve a small problem well than trying to solve a big problem poorly. With that, I thank you for your lack of attention and want to go smoking. Any questions?